Welcome, everyone, to this turf toast tasting that we're having today uh, for the Irish Whiskey Society America. Um, for those who might not know me yet, I'm Allan Dwyer, president, and this is the first uh, event we've ever done with peated, or as they refer to it in Ireland, turf whiskeys. So, be honest with you, when I was kind of coming up with an idea for a next event. Wasn't sure how well this one would be received because I know peated whiskey can be polarizing, and some people, their experiences with it might be limited to Scotch and don't like it, hesitant to try it, things like that. So, uh, really, the goal of today is I tried to construct a lineup and an event that would kind of cater to potentially everybody. So the idea was if you're a Pete fan, you should find something in this lineup that you like, or most likely you might not have had before. And if you're brand new to it, just trying to get into it, um, it should satisfy you as well. Um, the four whiskeys are from different uh, places, a couple different distillers, I think three different distilleries, or at least two. Different styles, couple malts, couple blends, um, and different finishes. So we'll be able to, I think again, a goal of today was to really show how Irish is doing turf. So if you're a fan of Scotch, I think you'll find that um, it's a little bit different in terms of what um, the Irish distillers and whiskey makers are trying to do. Um, and I don't think they're trying to be Scotch. So I think we'll talk about some of the differences and things like that today. I've got the chat function up that you can use. Um, and we're going to go through four different whiskeys, a little bit of education, but I want to say on the lighter side of that. We're not going to get too far in the weeds. I'm not, uh, you know, by any means an expert on peat, know enough to be dangerous, as they might say. If people want to share stuff, please feel free as we go along. I think we can open it up for some discussion as we go along as well. After maybe we're drinking each whiskey, get some thoughts. I'll be curious at the end. Maybe we'll do a favorite of the day kind of thing and see what people like the best out of the four. And then, as I'm sure, knowing some of you, you probably have some other whiskeys in reserve that you'll be sampling as well. So maybe we'll get some thoughts on that as well. But um, why don't we do this? Uh, just again, kind of kick off for those who are new to peat, um, or as I'll refer today, turf. It's just, and if you haven't seen it before, usually you'll see it in the form of like a brick. It's just organic matter, decomposed plant material, looks kind of like dirt. But it has a lot of compounds in it that make it a really good heating source. And as a result, back in the old days, as they say, in addition to being used as heat for a home, it was also used in the whiskey making process to dry the malt. So it's kind of as simple as that. When you dry the malt, you're burning the peat. It creates smoke. The smoke uh, goes into the malt and leaves its uh, characteristics in the malt, which then in certain ways make their way into the whiskeys. So we're going to talk today about how the Irish do it, the factors that impact how the turf affects the whiskey, And we'll talk a little bit about the types and differences of turf. Um, and, I think we'll kind of maybe debunk some myths along the way, um, and just kind of, get a sense of what's going on in the Irish whiskey world as far as turf goes. Because I think they used to do it, and along with the industry as a whole, it fell out of favor. Now that the industry has been making a resurgence over the last few years, you've got a lot of the newer, smaller distillers that are working with turf again and putting stuff out there. A lot of it hasn't made its way to the States. So I think in putting together this lineup, uh, I did try to, in case people are P fans and have gotten the stuff that's here, I wanted to include some stuff that wasn't available here. So I think one of the whiskeys is discontinued now. I know another two of them aren't available in the States. One's a exclusive limited edition store bottling that's not available anymore. So should give you ability to try some things maybe that you haven't tried before. But we'll kind of kick things off with the first whiskey. Um, and today that is going to be the Red Silky. So as you're kind of getting that ready, just a few comments on what this is. So this uh, Red Silky's from the Ardara Distillery in County Donegal. Um, may know it more as, or otherwise known as the Sleeve League Distillers. There's a pretty good range of silky whiskeys. These are sourced whiskeys from Great Northern. It's a peated range. So one of the things that they're trying to do um, is bring back peated style whiskeys to Donegal, which back in the old days, that's how they did it there. So that's one of the goals or missions of what they're trying to do. They've have released some of their own stuff as like a one-off first release. They would be surprised to see them release something this year, again in a small quantity of their own distillate. But in the meantime, we've got the Silky range, and they're doing different things with us. So what we're going to try today is one of those, the Red Silky, which is a kind of a limited edition outside of the what I'll call the core range. Um, the regular Silky, regular Silky is a blend, and that's what the Red Silky is. But just wanted to give you an idea of what the components are that make up the regular Silky, because basically what the Red Silky is, it's this whiskey with additional finishing in wine casks. So what I'm showing you here is kind of what you might call a complicated blend, but a combination of triple and double distilled malt and grain. And what you'll notice maybe with the percentages here is only 4% of this is made up of a peated single malt. The rest is non-peated. So probably could say that this is going to be the least peated or least turfed of the four that we're going to drink today. And kind of wanted to start it off that way as opposed to going heavy and then doing this one later. But it's combination of bourbon and sherry, virgin oak or heavily charred casks, and a little bit of peated malt in there. So this is kind of one of the ways I think that Irish is doing it, maybe a little different out of the gate in that they're not trying to be, a heavy IO Scotch type whiskey. Um, they're using smaller peated components within blends. Some of these we'll see another one later. So where you're not getting a full 100% turfed malt in some cases. Um, this is again, as I was saying, it's that blend we were just looking at and then it's finished in Spanish wine casks. So almost a 50-50 split, but a combination of Rioja casks and basically some red wine Spanish casks for 5 to 6 months. And that's going to give a little bit of a different taste to maybe what some of you have had the regular Silkie. Um, but this should give you an idea of maybe what the wine cask can also bring to it. So, sláinte, everyone. And I don't know if, I think when you nose this whiskey, some of you may not even um, pick up the turf component. It's very light, as I said, again, only 4%. Now, some people who I know that don't like turf whiskeys can smell it a mile away. So, I suppose it depends on your predilections and also how good your nose is. But it's definitely more in the background than for those of you who have got a lot of experience drinking turf whiskeys. But is anybody has have people had um, the regular Silky range at all? So of the Silkies, this is the regarded as the least peaty of them. Um, and I think one of the things we'll talk about today is in addition to um, how much, there's a lot of factors that impact how much the turf affects the whiskey. One of the ones too that I didn't list, we'll go over it in a few minutes, is just you can, have peated whiskeys and then you can put them into wine casks, which can then further mute the impact maybe of turf. Um, so this one, I didn't want both, I didn't want to have two light silkies in there, but if you have the regular one and you compare it, you can get a sense of how the wine casks change the regular silky. But, I think just taking a step back for a second, forgetting the whole turf theme for a minute, just as a nice drinking whiskey, I think the Silkies do a really good job, pretty well balanced considering all the different components that are going into them. They're all a little bit different in terms of how much peat percentage compositions in there. And they also have different wine finishes. So there's the midnight silky and the dark silky. There's a couple other limited editions, one that they did recently in ruby port casks, for example. So there's a lot of, like you can do with other blends and styles that you're probably familiar with. The turf just really just adds another element to the mix. So you can take any of the things you're used to, different casks, um, or mash bills, and you can throw a little bit of the turf component in there, just to add a new little wrinkle to it. So I think that's what some of these whiskey makers like Sleeve League are doing. So what did people think of that? That's kind of, I think, a good starter for this type of tasting. 46 ABV. I think everything we're doing today is 46 or higher. But again, part of if we were going to have any new um, people trying to get into the whole turf style today, I didn't want to turn anybody off right out of the gate and do a heavily ashy or a super peat that might turn them off to the next three. All right, so we're going to kind of ramp it up as we go in terms of the turf impact. But I did want to spend a moment in between the first two whiskeys, just a little bit more on ultimately what's going to affect um, the turf impact. And these are important in the sense that, sometimes you don't care, you just want to drink the whiskey, but people that are into turf and they pay attention to stuff, the marketing can kind of be very limited. And we'll talk about this later in terms of the ppm count, which is a measurement that's pretty much the one that's used to tell people how peaty something might be. But it's really, in my opinion, kind of useless for these reasons. In addition to just what kind of casks were used, which isn't even on this list, all of these factors can impact how the whiskey's ultimately going to taste, and is it going to be super peaty, lightly peated, what have you. So um, where is the peat from or the turf from? Not all turf is the same. There's coastal and inland. Um, how old is the turf you're using? So turf can be 1,000 years old or more. So if you're using really old versus new, it's going to impact the flavor. Um, as you can tell, they cut it into the ground. It's a natural product. And how deep into the ground you go will impact. So the top soil of turf is going to be different than, a foot down, for example. Um, even if you're using though the exact same turf, which many whiskey makers do, particularly in Scotland, they'll use the exact same peated malt, for example, but the whiskeys will taste dramatically different. And that gets into what you do once you get it. So you have things like, is it double or triple distilled? One of the things we'll see today, because we have examples of both, but if you distill it a third time, you lose some of the peat influence. So that, whereas most Scotch is double distilled, most Irish is triple, although I would argue a lot of the newer Irish distillers that are experimenting with turf uh, are double distilling. So, but it does impact, if you triple distill, you're going to lose some of the peat impact. Then you get into some of the, weeds of how the whiskey's made, how long is the fermentation process, um, where do you take the cut, heads, tails, hearts. Those of you who've been on whiskey tours and know how they cut the whiskeys. More of the peaty phenol impact is in the later stage of the cuts. So they can, if you cut more in the middle or front, it's going to lessen the impact. So again, you can use the same exact stuff, but cut it in different points in time to make the whiskey different. Same thing with, there are distilleries in Scotland, for example, that use identical malt, but have different still shapes. So that's going to make things different. And then you have things like when you're exposing the bar, when you're heating it, how long do you let the smoke impact it? The longer that you do, the more it's going to impact, things like that. So it can be both the type of peat you're using or just what you're doing in terms of how you're making the whiskey. All of these things. So you can see there's a lot of things, plus then what kind of cask you use. All of this can make something um, that you might think is going to be super peaty, not at all. And that's why, a lot of the stuff is actually similar at the beginning. but then just produces a very different whiskey. So um, the most of the stuff that's sourced right now in Ireland is actually using Scottish peat. We'll talk a little bit more about, that as we go. Even a couple ones that are doing their own peated stuff are still using Scottish peat. There are a couple um, that have sources of Irish peat, like Adara that we just did, um, and MICIL, which we're going to do as well. There are a few others of the small ones that have access to small peatlands or bogs that can use their own turf. Um, so there are a few, but a lot of the stuff that you may have already had is actually Scottish peat. Okay, let's do this. So the second whiskey we're going to do is from Connemara. So this is, um, might say the OG, the original Irish peated whiskey, the one that was really the only one on the market for about 20 years. Except this is now discontinued. This, known as Turfmore, it's a single malt, double distilled. Came out in this version in travel retail duty free back in 2016. There was an original Turfmore that came out, I think, in 2010 that was cast strength. Um, this version, when they kind of came out with the second edition of it, was only 46%. So this is not the original Turfmore. You can still, I think, find that in some select bars, like maybe like a Celtic whiskey bar somewhere like that might has a lot of the old Connemara's still. But what this is, it's a non-age statement, double distilled single malt. So we just did a blend. This one will be, in effect, all turf malted barley. It's been matured in a bourbon cask. So again, a little bit different. I wanted to kind of switch them up as we go. So this, again, single malt, only in a bourbon cask. Um, Turfmore means big peat in Gaelic. And I did put here, the 50 ppm. That's just a way that they try to measure how peaty something is. But as I was just showing you a minute ago, a lot of things can impact how it actually plays out in the final whiskey. And the 50 ppm actually refers to the whiskey. I'm sorry, refers to the turf before it actually goes through the process. So it's really not a good indicator because you can have two places that start off with this same level of peat. One double distills, one triple distills, and you're going to get a different resulting level of peat influence in the whiskey. And then all those other factors I mentioned. So you tend to see this marketed because that's how they get the information, but it's really not a very good or reliable indicator if you're looking for something that's super peat, or in some cases you could get turned off because you'll see something that has like a really high ppm count, and then you'll drink it and you'll be like, "Wow, this isn't peated at all." And maybe it's because they aged it for 18 years, and that's going to reduce the influence versus say a 4 year where it's still going to be very peaty. So, um, my one takeaway today, people can disagree or provide their own opinions too, but I wouldn't use this as a good indicator if you're trying to try out whiskeys. Don't let this turn you off. Or maybe it's better not to know and just try the whiskey first before you try to maybe see what they say the ppm count is. But let's if you nose this one, you should get a much more of a turf influence on the nose than the first one. But I don't think again, it doesn't knock you over because you still get, elements of sweet and vanilla. in there. And on the no on the taste, again, you can see this one's definitely got more of the more turf influence on it than the silky. Again, by design. Has anybody had this version of Connemara before? Yeah, this one's definitely hard to find. Maybe some of the auctions might have it. Never made it to the States, obviously, in this form. Um, but my bottle's not gonna, I don't think will last through this tasting event, to be honest with you. But it's um it's nice because it's a little bit of a step up from regular Connemara, which is only 40% ABV. This one's a little bit heavier turf component, but it's pretty nicely balanced. It's got a lot of the kind of the sweet vanilla, honey notes, bourbon cask elements that you'd expect. But you're definitely getting more of the turf influence, without a wine cask or heavy aging, things like that. Again, double distilled, so you're going to get more of the turf influence as well. So, but it's all relative because, someone might say, well, geez, turf more big peat. This is nothing compared to some of the stuff you may have had from Scotland. But again, I think maybe one of the takeaways of today's event was to show how they're doing it in Ireland. It's definitely different. Um, yeah, I don't think they're trying to be Scotch peated whiskey, which is a good thing. I think in a lot of cases, you're either not gonna um, you're not gonna get that crowd out of the gate because they're used to what they are. So I think they're trying to be different, which is a good thing. They're trying to get the newer Irish drinker introduced to the style. And a good way to do it is through some of these um, lighter approaches, maybe, as opposed to trying to knock you over the head with it. So once you kind of try some of these, like everything else, then you step up to other things. So I think, we may see bigger turf whiskeys from Ireland down the road, particularly from some of these smaller distillers that are doing their own thing. You may not see it as a commercial wide release product. They might be one-offs, things like that, but I'm sure some of that might be in the pipeline over the next few years. So, have I lost anybody yet, or you're just, or you're all saying, "Give me more"? It's not enough, not enough turf. But yeah, I think if you do Connemara side by side, you will find that they're different. There's a 12-year part of the core range. There's also a 22-year that isn't it's discontinued now, I guess you'd say. You still find bottles floating around or find it in pubs in Ireland. So that would be a good example of something that is a much longer age statement. So you're going to find the turf influence lessened there as well. So there's some cast strength versions floating around still too. So um, Connemara's, obviously they're the ones that have been doing it the most for the longest in terms of Irish makers. But the turf they're using is not from Ireland. I think it was initially at the very beginning, but once, that was what, 25 years ago? More, actually, no, 35 years ago, dating myself. Um, so, like a lot of the ones that are wider release, it's not actually turf from Ireland. at this point. All right. Move along. So let's, before we jump into whiskey number three, we'll get into this will be as weedy as I get, no pun intended. But types of turf peat. So I mentioned how they vary by location. So, Irish peat will be, or Irish turf will be different than what you can get in the Highlands of Scotland or along the coast in either Ireland or Scotland. Um, and the way you tell the difference, you can't do it by sight typically, but um, I mentioned the ppm earlier. That's phenol uh, parts per million, which is just how much of the carbon compounds are that exist in the soil that's been decomposing for 1,000 years. And depending on where you get it, it's going to have different characteristics and elements. So these are just some of the things, but I think when people are trying turf peat whiskey, these are the common things that you get on the nose or on the taste. And, so these would be the technical kind of things, but phenol, you can get medicinal or iodine. Um, you can get burnt and smoky notes. So when they refer to some of these, the guicol, I guess, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you're not going to get this on the nose. You're only going to get these elements on the taste. Conversely, the Sringol is the opposite. You're going to get the burnt smoky notes only on the nose, not on the taste. So depending on how much of these kind of things are in that peat cut is going to dictate to some extent, whether it's how smoky it is. Does it have an iodine element to it, or is it more organic and earthy, which is known as the cresol? More mossy, earthy. So again, it can be a fairly complicated thing if you experiment and try a lot of different turfed whiskeys. I realize not a lot to experiment with Irish whiskey yet, but it's definitely expanding. And a less technical way of thinking about this is, when you're trying these, burnt, smoky, medicinal, maritime are four ways that you might describe what you're um, smelling or tasting. Sometimes you hear ashy, things like that, but um, you can have one or two of these things. You usually not going to have all of them because you're not going to necessarily get um, the maritime on the inland stuff, for example. But these are, again, ways. And one of the challenges too is you kind of got to do it on your own. You're not going to see a lot of this stuff, on the bottle, or even if you're doing research, you're not going to see these technical things typically, um, or telling you, they don't really give out what type of peat it is. You might find where it's from, but in terms of some of these real technical things, um, are going to probably remain a mystery. But this is what influences, as well as how they make it, ultimately, how the whiskey tastes. So, having said that, third whiskey we're going to do is from MICIL. And this is one of my favorite blends of the last few years. So MICIL, as most of you know, uh, out in Galway, one of the smallest distilleries in Ireland. We have a cask that will be 3 in July, which does have some turf component in it. So MICIL is one of the um, distilleries that is using their own turf in their whiskey. Um, this is a blend known as the INVERIN. Can't get it in the States. Um, if you're in Ireland, well, you can order from their website too, though. So I'd recommend that. But if you're in Ireland, I'd grab it, um, duty free. But this is a pretty complex blend, 46%. And I'll show you what I mean. So, two things to look at here before we try it. First is what the blend is. So you can see that it's a five-part blend. It's got two types of grain. Um, it's got triple distilled peated malt, 20%. So if you recall, the blend we did from SILKIE only had 4%. So this is a much higher peated component. But like that, it's still only 20%. So again, some of these you can, in one sense, increase or decrease the impact that the turf will have on the whiskey by just having it be a smaller component of the overall blend. But combination of triple and double distilled malts and grains, and then once they get the mash bill down, when you go to how they age it, um, you can see over here on the left, there's a combination of using rechar bourbon casks, PX sherry casks, and then there's a small component that used the chestnut cask, which had previously held the heritage poachine. So what's nice about this is, if some of you may recall or know, the cask that we're aging, the whiskey cask, is chestnut cask and it's the heritage pot still blend. So it's kind of peated, non-peated wheat, oat, rye combination. But so pretty complicated. You've got all these different components, a little bit heavier peat, using a sherry, bourbon, and chestnut cask in the mix. No, went too far. But so as you try this one, again, I think compared to the last, you don't necessarily get that big hit of turf right on the nose. I think on this one you get it more in the taste and the finish. But I don't know if I would call this necessarily a turf forward whiskey. I think it's there working kind of in concert with the other elements. So I think in a way this is a good way, really good example of how you can kind of introduce yourself to the style, if you're trying to kind of train your palate to peated whiskeys and work your way up the ladder, so to speak. Chat. All right. We'll catch up on the chat function here. So I know some of you have been to Mickle, definitely worth a visit. They did release so this is sourced. So they have the blend, they have a pot still, a couple pot stills in different wine finishes that are Great Northern sourced. They also released their first whiskey last year, which was peated, or turfed. And, as I said, our cask will be 3 in July, and it'll be, you know, this time next year, we'll be starting, I guess, conversation about, bottling that in 2026 because it's a 4-year program. It's a small quarter cask, so you're going to get the influence of the chestnut wood. It's going to be probably pretty good. You don't want it to go much longer. Um, but my hope would be that we'll be able to have those bottlings, um, certainly later in 26 in time for the holidays. Just going through the chat function. So we've got one more to go. Before we jump into that one, just a couple things I wanted to just bring up too. I kind of alluded to a couple of these things, but I would my argument or contention would be don't pay attention to ppm when you see that listed as how peaty something is. It again references typically. Sometimes you will see what it is before and what it is after distillation and maturation, but 99% of the time, I'd argue it's shown as what it is before. And there are plenty of examples. Some of you who are bigger peat fans than me, or aficionados, or have just been drinking it a long time, will know that there are some things that have real high ppm that when you drink it aren't very peaty at all, and vice versa. And it has to do with how long it's aged and how many times it's distilled and all that kind of stuff we went over before. So don't let this be, don't judge a book by its cover, maybe that kind of thing. The other thing too is, and some people, because I think most of us uh, are from the States, um, there is a difference between smoky and peaty. They can be the same thing in one sense, but they don't have to be. So you can have peated whiskey that isn't smoky, and you can have smoky whiskey that isn't peated. So there are smoky whiskeys here in the States that use different heating sources like mesquite, things like that. Some of the American, like down in Texas, I think there's a couple that are doing stuff like that. So um, just because something's smoky doesn't mean it's peated. So not that you necessarily need to know that, but if you don't like smoke, um, you could get a non-peated whiskey that will be smoky and you won't like. But if you don't like smoke, you can find peated whiskeys that aren't smoky. So just a little bit of a distinction um, to maybe be aware of when you're kind of experimenting with some stuff. Because you may, oh, this is peated, and then you'll nose it and you'll be like, oh, it's not smoky at all, that kind of thing. But all right. Having said all that, we've got our last whiskey, which is another single malt. This is so this is a limited edition Teeling BLACKPITS single cask that they did for James Fox, one of our friends and partners, the Irish Whiskey Society of America. And um, I think a lot of you may have tried the regular BLACKPITS, which is kind of the one of the newest permanent, brands that are doing peat on the marketplace, particularly in the States. So you had CONNEMARA for years, the only one really here in the States. And then SILKIE was released and doing their thing as a blend. Teeling came out with this uh, a few years ago now. I think this might be its 4th year. But this was the first triple distilled turf whiskey, Irish whiskey. And the version of BLACKPITS, it's peated single malt. The original version has a Sauterne cask finish. The peat, I would argue, was really kind of in the background. Um, and that's at 46%, like I think most of the Teelings are. When they did this special bottling with James Fox, limited edition, it's less than 300 bottles, and it was exclusively aged in PX sherry casks. from Harris. So you're not going to get that sauterned uh, finish element if you're used to that from the regular black pits. The other difference is this is cast strength, so it's a much higher ABV, 60.5%. So obvious reasons doing this last. But I think what you'll get from this, it's about a 6, 7 year terms of time aged. Um, but you're going to see what both a higher ABV and a full maturation in a sherry cask, does to the peat influence as well. So, Slancha. But to me, this one has a, a longer finish, and the peat just kind of lingers there. The turf lingers there. Um, Not overpowering, but you definitely get it. Um, I get it more on the finish than I do on the nose myself. I believe Teeling sources their peat from the Highlands, or at least they used to. Can't say for sure that, um, but that's where the original version of Black Pits came from. So I don't know what people think of that. You can, if you feel free to unmute yourselves if you'd like to offer any opinions or comments too beyond the chat. But Ian, had you had this one before?
Not that specific one, but I will try it when I get back next week to the States. I've had a couple of other different black pits, but not the James Fox one.
Yeah, we picked this one up last spring when we were in Dublin. It didn't last very long. It's really good.
Yeah,
The regular
Always
cast
a good
strength is
time.
really good. So I always have a regular cast strength on the shelf, but yeah, that one was spectacular.
yeah, it didn't last long in the store either. I think I don't know what the status is of it, but Celtic also did um a limited edition with
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Well, I don't know if they have any left or not.
I don't think that was in PX though, but I forget.
No, it was a
It
little
was
different, I think, but it
different.
was I just don't know if they have it anymore. But so there have been a few one-offs that they've done.
Yeah, we drank through that one too.
And Celtic are onto their third version of their peated Marsala Celt. I
Yeah.
think it's the same distillate each one, but it's getting a year older each time.
Yeah, which will be interesting because if people have all three of those and maybe they're expecting it to get peatier and it's maybe getting less peaty.
It's still young enough that the peat won't die off.
Yeah.
You'll just get more of the influence from the Marsala, but you've got at least a good decade before peat will start to die off on
Yeah.
whiskey.
The I have the kind of the ancestor of that, the Killarney cask. So this is what Celtic did before they released the Celt. This is the single cask that you can pour yourself if you go to the Celtic whiskey bar in Killarney. So this distilled May of 16. I bottled it December of 22. And it's a peated single malt Marsala cask, 58. no, call it 59% ABV. So it's kind of the same cask family. They're doing the single cask out of the bar, and they've, as you were saying, they've bottled the Celt from that family of casks, but just at a lower ABV.
Yeah, I think the Celts are 46,
Yeah.
whereas yours is cast strength.
Yep. So, um, but yeah, so I think you're getting a lot of the, and again, for those of you are more who know your peated scotches better, but I think because one of the things they've done in Ireland is they've really experimented with a lot of different casks, and now that they're bringing in, more doing turf, you're kind of getting that combination. So they're bringing the turf into it, and they're still doing all the different wine cask type maturations that maybe you haven't seen if you're a turf fan in the Scotch world. Um, but I'll be the first to tell you, I couldn't tell you. I don't know if there's been like a Marsala, peated Marsala Scotch, that kind of thing. But because I know that in Ireland they tend to use a lot more um, of the unique wine cask stuff over the last few years as they're trying to distinguish themselves.
Yeah, there's a few. I think Bruichladdich is one of them where their owners came from the wine world, and their the Port Charlotte and Octomores are usually pretty unique casking that you can find. Everything from cognacs to the fun Marsala, Chickapin, Oak, and some of those really funky ones. That they've done a good job with that, I think. And I think sweet with the peat, no matter what the sweetness comes from, it just balanced out really well.
Mhm.
So I'm really liking this sherry with the peat is really nice. And at cast strength, I will never complain.
Yeah, I know you're. I knew you'd like that one. Yeah, I think So sometimes when people have tried peated scotches, maybe being their limited experience with it, and they've only had stuff that maybe didn't have a wine finish. And I think there's just a lot more out there, particularly with some of the more experimental distilleries, things like that. So there's definitely a range now where I think it can be a little bit less intimidating. Doesn't necessarily knock you over. Even this cast strength, I find, extremely drinkable, partly because of the exclusive maturation in the sherry, but that's a pretty high ABV. And, I don't think you necessarily have to add water to it. Um, the water might open it up a little bit, but it's certainly, I find it very drinkable, even at the higher ABV.
Yeah, I think something is definitely what you were getting at before. I don't think people realize how important it is. Where they're sourcing the peat from makes a significant difference because
Mhm.
some of them have like this, you're in a charcoal mine kind of taste versus being in an iodine hospital kind of taste, or you can
Mhm.
have some peat that's a little more maritime-y and there's some pretty good variation when you really get into it that I enjoy. But it where it comes from makes a big impact to how it tastes.
And I will be the first to admit that iodine peat is my favorite peat over other peats, but I'm happy to try everything. I love the mesquite smoke stuff. I like what Westland are doing with Washington peat, but iodine is my
What would
favorite.
be kind of what you would call your go-to uh,
Lefroy.
the Lefroy of that?
Hardbag. Hardbag. We're gonna have a fight.
Okay.
Cage match.
I'm sorry, how many silly limited editions have you released on the Ardbeg side of the world?
Stupid marketing people.
You mean this month, right? That's a big number.
Yeah, just this month.
Wow. I woke a sleeping giant there with that question. Okay. I think
Lefroy,
nah,
Ardbeg, Kilida, those are
Yeah.
Bruichladdich, they're all excellent.
yeah, this is where you get into the people that are passionate about peat, um, tend to be very vocal about it.
Oh,
Either and
mhm.
or either hate it or they love it. So either way, you kind of um, people share their opinion. So
Very good.
it'll be interesting to see, though.
It just blunt. It just blurs out.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what some of the Irish makers that are using their own, um, how that's going to differ from what people are used to, from the Scottish peat.
In
Uh,
theory, like if you look at something like the Aran Islands, they would have something that should be similar to Ardbeg
mhm.
because a lot of their ground was fertilized with seaweed or with Ardbeg with anything from Islay because basically they had no soil on the island. So they brought up sand, seaweed, and made soil, but it'll take a lot longer before you actually get peat from there. But yeah, there's just a huge variance in different types and flavors of peat.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges too, um, in Ireland is just um, being able to source it, because there are environmental issues with it without getting into that whole thing, but you can't just go out and be bulldozing the environment these days. So I think a lot of, it's not going to be, I don't think it'll ever become just a very common thing. I know with like Mickle, they own the land. Um, and I think, there are certain spots up in Donegal that they can access it as well. But you're probably going to still see a pretty steady stream of sourced from Scotland.
Most of the
Probably
use or abuse of peat, though, is commercial gardening. It's not whiskey. The In Scotland, I think even the whiskey industry uses 3% of the peat that's used on a yearly basis.
Yeah, people are still heating their homes with it and using it
Yeah.
as a fuel source. So, and that's one of the biggest
Yep. Oh yeah, no,
consumer.
it's definitely not
No,
it's
that's
just
not anywhere near the biggest usage of it.
no.
It's commercial gardening and compost and soil. The home usage is grand and whiskey is grand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have any of you tried to, buy your own turf brick for
Yes.
heating and then just like put your whiskey near the fireplace and try to like artificially peat it after the fact?
It
You
doesn't
can
work.
still get Irish turf in America.
It's hard to get Irish turf in America,
It's harder and getting more expensive now, but yes, it was available, reasonably priced for a while.
and the TSA likes to take it away from you if you try to bring it back in your suitcase.
That I've never tried. Intriguing.
It's one of those organic things, so you can't bring back organic material. I don't know.
I ordered online from the East Coast.
It's like trying to bring back haggis. You can't do that either, bastards.
You're gonna have to get your own private jet.
Why would you want to bring back the haggis?
It's great. I
I
initially
hear some of the
challenged my
ones
flight
made
next
here are
week.
better.
Hey, Scottish haggis is really good
If done right.
if done right.
Yep.
It's really not.
Yeah.
Having lived in Scotland 5 years, it's really not.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Well, compared to the canned crap you get over here.
I will say my suitcase for next week is currently full of beer from Lochgill because I want to do a Bowan and Lochgill tasting because all of this year's Lochgill beers were in Bowan casks. So let's see how much of it I can bring
Ah,
back.
all
I
right.
currently have 18 cans in a 750 ml bottle.
Yeah, so I think what'll be also interesting is don't have an example of it today, but with Irish, you'll be able to do peated single pot stills, which will be one way too to differentiate from Scotch. So there are some that have already been released, small batches. So some of the other uh, brands or whiskey makers that are doing stuff, so Baylock's doing stuff. I think Cullowen, um, who am I forgetting? Uh, I think Dunville's has done a peated blend. So there are others doing peat out there, that just you may not have seen yet. Who am I forgetting? Anybody? Um, because I know I'm forgetting. Oh, Short Cross, I think, has done some stuff too, right? So there are others that are, experimenting with stuff. You will see, I think, some more single pot stills come out.
That is.
Over
Yay, Blaylock, Donegal Mountain Dew.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
And short cross.
Intro, Chris.
Yeah. So, I think again, it may not um become a big commercial product available here in the States. Like a Black Pits, for example. Teeling's got a big distributorship. Um, so some of these smaller places like a Baylock won't probably, I don't know if they'll ever come to the States. So you'll have to kind of get it from one of the likely sources, like a James Fox. Oh yeah, the bow on the Whistler range. I forgot about that one. But I think one of the things too, with all, not to get into politics at all, but with all the tariff talk, you may find that it's going to be easier, more available, and maybe ultimately cheaper to just kind of bypass the tariffs and pay the shipping to order from a place like Irish Malts, James Fox, things like that. Um, so even though you're paying, if you're buying 4 bottles or more, you can get the shipping down to almost $20 a bottle, which, in the end, depending on how things shake out with some of these tariffs and things, you may find that you're able to get some things you can't get here anyway, and actually it's cheaper. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But something that I know I'm watching, to see if it's going to start to make more sense to just order more. Not that some of you that's stopped you, some of you, well, based on watching the chats and some other things, all the orders that I see people posting pictures of what they have delivered and stuff hasn't stopped you up to this point.
Historically, you had a prohibition in this country.
You know
need
what?
10 years worth of whiskey just in case it comes back.
There you go.
Prudent investment, 10 years worth.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you figured out like how much you need to per year and how long it could last?
I'd
That
have to ration it, but I'd be close. I think I could
This is
manage
something
10
for
years, but
taste.
I'd ration it.
I don't want to do the math. That's too complicated. I
I
want to
think
count
we're
my
good.
bottles.
I think we'll survive the apocalypse.
We're fine.
all
Thank you.
right. You say that now, but then you got to worry about your neighbors coming over and trying to, like, take some from you. So
It's an Airbnb. We don't care.
That's what guns are for,
you got to be real friendly with your neighbors in that case.
and traps.
What I don't know if any. I know you only had small portions of these, but so you can't necessarily go back to them. But what were what were people's favorite of the 4 today?
Black Pits was my favorite.
I'd agree.
I like the INVERIN, Ellen.
Okay.
That combination of chestnut poachine and PX is lovely.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the INVERIN. Yeah, I like what Mickle's doing in general, but that one's one I tell people to grab. If not there, then if going through duty free in Shannon, I know you can get it typically, so it's definitely worth picking up. What has anybody, Matt? I know you get a lot of the Whistler stuff down your way.
Mhm.
That's one that I actually haven't had, the good, the bad, the smoky. I haven't had that one before.
It's up there with the regular Teeling Black Pits. It's up there as one of my favorite peated Irish whiskeys. I'm a huge fan of it.
That one a blend?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting what some of them are doing with the blends. it's not 100% peated, so they're definitely lowering the peat influence, um, which again I think is not a bad way to do it when you're trying to get people to try the product. Um, I think if you tried to come right out of the gate and compete with the Ardbegs and Lafroigs, you might find it, not the best way to try to capture new drinkers. So I think kind of going easy on it and and building over time might be a better way to go for some of these. Um, yeah, the two stacks have put out a bunch of things using smaller peated components as well that have been nice. The Smoke and Mirrors is one. They've got a couple others that they've done with I mean their regular blends all have a very like a 2% peated component to it, but they've done some other with bigger and different finishes that have been really nice. What was the Baylock one that you're drinking tonight, Kian?
So that is their five cask vatting batch two. So if I
Okay.
can squint on the back, it says it's 30 to 50 liter casks. One was bourbon, one was peat and port, one was peat and sherry, one was sherry, and one was vermouth. It's between 18 and 24 months old, and it's very nice. So
Is it
40%
is it all
roughly.
is it 100% peated or is it
No, only two of the five components were peated, the peat
okay?
and port and the peat and sherry. The other three weren't.
Okay.
But there's a good amount of peat carrying through on it. It's very nice.
So I have the Blaylock Donegal Mountain Dew,
Yep.
which is
Port finish, right?
50% malt, 7% rye, 15% oats, 28 raw barley, um, port cask finished.
I think I've had one of those, but every I love Waylock. Everything I've had from them has been great.
This was from the Cork Whiskey Fest last year. It was their.
Oh, I've definitely yes, I've bought multiple bottles of that one. So yes, I have
I
that.
haven't had it for a
We
while.
also drank it down in Metropole. We're like, oh, you've
Yeah,
Waylock. We have it
just
in the bar.
open. I'm like,
Please serve
holy
it to me.
crap! This is so good.
Probably a creamy sipper, isn't it, Jeff? With that oats in there.
Oh,
Mm.
nice, very nice.
Yeah, that's a good one. I
Yeah.
It
think
is. It
I
is
didn't get the
52.3. So
I didn't get the cork one. I got the non-cork fest one that they did through Irish Malts. That's
yeah, Irish malts.
I think they might have actually made that one available through Irish Malts after the
I
festival
think they
too.
did, but if
Yeah.
you don't have it, Alan, let me know and I'll sort you out.
There was only like 67 bottles of
Yeah, it was
this.
very it went
Yeah,
quickly.
very expensive.
Yeah.
But they had done a release or two um, through Irish Malts a, well over a year ago now. Not all their stuff makes it there, but yeah, if you see a bottle of their stuff, it's definitely worth picking up, peated or not. I would contend
Yeah,
based on what I
Blaylock.
had.
Do anything wrong?
The other one I forgot to mention too, one of the ones that was an early kind of entry in the Irish Peat was the W.D. O'Connell, Bill Phil.
Yeah,
Bill Phil.
Mhm.
So this is actually well, I got a little bit left, but this is a batch one bottle. So I don't know, they're probably up to 7 or 8 now. Kind of
Mhm.
lost track, but yeah, so this is a single malt. This was very nice too. So, you know, definitely expanding the range of
Bill Phil left. Damn it! I got.
turf offerings out there. So if you want to try them, there's certainly some things you can find because the Bowan, the WD, the Silky, the Black Pits, those are all available pretty widely in the States.
I
Uh,
think the other interesting thing is the definition of peated now, because you can have, I've peated my malt, I've peated, or like West Cork did, they charred the inside of a cask with peat.
yep,
And you have other distillers that will say, I've now put it in an ex-peated cask. So you take something that had Lafroy, other
yep,
peated whiskies are available, and
yep,
they've put their whiskey into that then instead. So anything they can do to extract a peat flavor without necessarily peating the malt. And like in the States, they've done they've blown the smoke from mesquite through the distillate versus it actually being peated malt.
Yeah, so W.D. O'Connell did that. Um, they did a single grain that was aged in a former Lafroig cask, and they did it as a store, limited edition store bottling here. It's right up the street from my house, actually, at the Gordon's Liquors. They forget the age statement on that one, but that was a Lafroig cask. I think Ackle Island Distillers, they also did that with one
Yeah,
of their
they
first.
did.
Their peated is actually finished in a peated cask.
The
Um,
same as Lockmaster doing the same thing as well.
yeah, so that's yeah. There are a lot of different ways to try to introduce, just another flavor profile into the mix, and create different combinations of things. So it's kind of good. One of the nice things about having a lot of the smaller um, whiskey makers and the bonders and stuff, they'll experiment because they're not necessarily trying to make a core release. So they'll do like one-offs in some of these cases. So then it's just a case of you can get your hands on a bottle of it, I suppose. What do people have a favorite, not necessarily from tonight's lineup, but just a favorite Irish peat at this point, or an Irish turfed whiskey?
Mine was because my bottle is now long gone. I can't get it again. It was a 1992 Connemara, and I think it was like a 13-year-old one. It was just delicious.
I haven't had too many peated or turfed Irish whiskeys, but out of the ones I have tried, I'd have to say either the Whistler Good, Bad, and Smoky or Blackpitts from Teeling. Those are up there in my top two. I do like the legendary Dark Silky also.
Oh, yeah, Jeff, that's true. The Waterford, I forgot about. I was drinking and losing an hour's sleep and all that. I can't remember all these off the top of my head today. But yeah, Waterford had a few different expressions using Irish peat in a couple of them that I know of. So
Yeah, the Spanish court's really good.
you know,
Yep.
so those you couldn't those I don't believe came to the States, the peated ones. I think you had to get them either through
I
auction.
thought the peated cuvee may have, but otherwise, yeah, order them online if you see them. While
Yeah.
you see them.
Yeah, the Finnish court and the Ballybanyan were both really good. I think those were the first two they released.
Yeah, and I think there was Lacken and I can't remember the fourth one. There were four peated ones in total, at least of the individual farms.
I believe in what they did, but I'm just not a huge fan of Waterford. Sorry.
I really like their peated stuff. I really like their heritage ones, the Headhunter and the Goldthorpe. Some of their other releases, I liked trying the experiments. They weren't necessarily great whiskies.
There
I
you go.
appreciate the differences between them, but I come from that from a trying lots of different beers or things and
Yeah.
liking to compare and contrast, understanding that I'm not a target audience.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
not
I
the
mean,
person going to buy a bottle and go, this is good. I'm going to go, I can see the difference.
doing the side by side. This farm's on this side of the road, and this farm's on that side of the road, and taste the two, and they're totally different. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Like great
His
whiskeys.
uncle at the wedding insulted her cousin, and that led to a huge feud, and that's why the whiskeys are
I
different.
know.
Well, it's kind of funny because I would a lot of times the people that are really into peat on the Scotch side, that's kind of the stuff they love to get into the weeds. And I've sat and listened in the background to people arguing about ppm and so all this. It's just like, all right, we get it. It's like, is the whiskey any good? Because they love to argue about all that stuff. So
Yeah, see, I'm with you completely on the ppm because everybody measures it pre-distillation, and there's so many things that can affect ppm through distillation that the end product has nothing to do with what the original ppm.
Yeah, I mean there are
So,
there are examples. I can't remember the exact names. You got some of you might know, but there are some Scotch brands they use identical malt going into the process. So but yet they're night and day on the finished product. So
so for those who are interested in reading about it, and Jeff, I'm assuming you have the book, Mike Billett's Peat and Whiskey book.
Yes.
It's
Yep.
excellent. It's a part travelogue, part like very, very detailed about whiskey. The only thing I regret is I can't find where he got his samples of the chemical bits of peat because I'd love to buy those and try them.
Yeah, we get kind of nerdy about peat.
yeah,
Some of us.
got to be passionate about something, right? You
Yep.
can. The other thing you do if you're trying to ease your way into it, you can just sit by a turf fire, drinking regular whiskey, and just kind of do that as a stepping stone.
We've done that. It's amazing.
But yeah, it is interesting to see what some of the people are doing with it. Um, a lot of them are one-offs, but so if you get to try them, it's fun. I'll be curious to see this year um, if anything new is available, like a whiskey live with some of these guys that are experimenting, because that's kind of where you see a lot of it.
Well, and I appreciate like the guys that do Silkie. I mean, they kind of hung their hat on
Mhm.
peat. And it's not all it's not all really intense peat, but the whole range can get like the cast strength and the dark Silkie and the midnight. Yeah. So.
Yeah, they're all a little different. I like the Midnight a lot.
Mhm. I
And
like the cast strength a lot.
yeah, the one I really like is I picked it up when I was in Ireland in December, is the Ruby Port cast strength.
Not had that yet. I
Yeah,
want it.
that one's really nice. I picked that
That's
up
the one
at
you're
at,
asking me about,
at
yeah.
Celtic. Um,
I mean, Ruby Port and peat just go together.
yeah, so that one's nice. So yeah, I think I'll be curious to see when they put out their own stuff too, which I think is going to be more of the variety of kind of mixed mash bills type stuff. So it'll be interesting to see when they put their own stuff out, particularly if it's more heavily peated than the Silkies have been.
Yeah.
But no, so this was again when I was putting the kind of easing into February. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll use February. It's a short month. I'll focus on turf as kind of a theme for February. Do a cocktail, do a whiskey review, and let's even try to do a tasting event and see what kind of interest there might be. Wasn't sure um, to what extent people would be interested in, because I know some people really like it, but it's definitely not doesn't have mass appeal, I guess is how I would put it right now. So I do appreciate people jumping on today and sharing their thoughts and stuff. Um, because I know it's not for everybody, but I think it is especially to me a winter whiskey. I wouldn't necessarily. I know some people probably drink it all year long, but I wouldn't probably be drinking peated in July. Um, but I kind of stopped drinking Guinness in July as well, so it's kind of
See, that's what I can't agree with because Guinness is a year-round drink.
yeah.
It's
Well,
I
4.3%,
agree,
low
Ken,
ABV. You can drink it.
all year round.
you can, but I tend to in the sweltering heat. It's not the alcohol. It's just I find it to be more of a spring, fall, winter whiskey. That's why I take a couple months off to cleanse the palate.
See, living in California summer is about 9 months, so I can't take that off.
That's true. Yeah, you got to adapt accordingly. I guess you're right. Um, But yeah, sometimes in like the heat and humidity that we get here, it's like not really interested in, heavily. I'll be honest with you. I won't even do like heavier pot stills in the summer. Like red breast, I'll usually take the summer off as an example. But maybe that's just an excuse to try things on the back of the shelf.
I wouldn't be able to drink anything then if I
Yeah, you're
worried
right.
about the heat.
Well, it's all relative though, right?
Yes.
You might come up here and think it's like winter and, you're drinking Irish coffee. So who knows? I spent a week in Ireland during the drought heat wave 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember now.
You mean it didn't rain for one day? That's a drought
No,
in
no,
Ireland.
when the temperature was in the 90s. And
Yeah, I had my brother warning me. He's like, "You're not going to want to do stuff during the day. It's like going to be 85." I'm like, "It's 88 here at 10 p.m. We'll be fine.
when
We're
you're in
good."
Ireland and it's hitting 90 and you go into golf courses and they're just brown and barren because they haven't rained in a month, and you find yourself drinking more gin and tonics than Guinness. That's like, it's hot because they don't have any air conditioning over there. So we're
Nope.
spoiled. No, no turf fires that week or 2 weeks, whatever it was.
Hopefully it's Mickle gin and tonic.
Um,
Or dingle
this
gin.
would have been pre-Mickle, so this would have been there was a lot of Dingle gin at that point.
Dingle
Cork
gin,
dry
yep.
gin if you're lucky.
Yeah, a lot of Dingle stuff. Uh, anybody have any? Well, Keen, you're over there. What's
Yep.
on your itinerary tomorrow?
Working tomorrow and Tuesday. And later this week. So one of my childhood friends moved back home, so he now lives 3 doors away from me. He'd heard of Boylock. He's never tried Boylock, so he will come down. We will drink this bottle, which is now frozen. My video is frozen, same bottle, but I'll give him the rest of it. And then back into town, probably Friday, Saturday, back to bar 1661.
Aren't you going to like leave Dublin for next weekend because of St. Patty's Day?
I'm flying back to the States on Sunday, the 16th.
I
Will
mean,
you, will
I know
you,
all the tourists just like bombard Dublin
Ugh.
for next weekend. I wouldn't want any part of it.
And historically, I've never gone into town on Paddy's Day here for the weekend. I remember years ago I went in. We're going into a pub and the bouncer stops and goes, "You've been drinking." I'm like, "Yes, it's Paddy's Day. Of course I've been drinking." And that confused him and we just went in. But no, I'm not a town crowd parade type of person.
were
So
you
I'll
at
avoid
Aviva?
all that by
You at
leaving the
Aviva
country.
yesterday?
No, thankfully not.
That was a tough one.
France deserved to win, but it was very disappointing to
Yeah, that
watch.
was tough. Um, while if you haven't yet, I would recommend maybe a little brief excursion over to the Corkscrew.
Okay, yeah, I might check that out.
Um, they have some things in there that they have some store only bottlings.
Well, I know they have the James Ryan Symphony, or Jack Ryan Symphony, that's really good. So maybe I'll have a look and see what else they have.
Yeah, they have some things from Two Stacks that are store only bottlings, I think. I think they have the Two Stacks Grand Marnier finish.
Which could be interesting, but I have some similar ones from Stories and Sips of orange liqueur
Yeah,
finish.
no, that's why I didn't buy that one actually, because I had a couple other orange liqueur type stuff already.
Hey, gang, I got to take a work call, so I got to run, unfortunately. And you guys have a
Uh,
great evening,
Thanks
great
for
week.
seeing you. Hey, if anybody hasn't filled out that Patty's Day poll, please do so. As
I filled that out twice because I wanted to change my movie vote to the correct vote second time round.
okay, yeah, I didn't collect emails. Good seeing you, Matt. I didn't collect emails, so yeah, I won't know if you want to flood the ballot box.
No,
So,
no, just twice. Everything else was the same between the two.
but yeah, definitely getting some interesting answers for some of the stuff. So.
So what other movie answers are you getting then? Because I originally
Oh,
put in The Quiet Man because I couldn't think of anything else, but I switched it to the Rising of the Moon trilogy.
okay. Well, so far, The Quiet Man, I think last time I looked was leading, which surprised me because I just didn't. I mean, I know it's famous and all that, but
Yeah.
it's ancient and I don't know. To me, it doesn't scream St. Patrick's Day. Um, it's just I don't know. I was surprised at how many people were putting that down, but I don't know. Maybe it was because they couldn't think of something at the
Yeah.
time.
That's why it was my first entry. But for anyone who hasn't seen the Rising of the Moon trilogy, it's three short movies. One is about Irish rebels during 1916. That's the actual Rising of the Moon. One is about a man that was being fined for making moonshine. And one is about a train that's stopping at a station for 1 minute. And it's a great trilogy of movies. It's very lighthearted and very well worth watching. So if you search for The Rising of the Moon, you should find the one DVD with all three movies on it.
Oh, all right. Yeah, there's some I won't reveal. I'm going to write about it, but there were a couple that I thought were that I'll probably write. I'll put in the feature article in the newsletter that comes out this week. Some things that you wouldn't expect to be. Um, I like one of them. I was like, "How is that?" I'm like, oh, "Okay." I remember there's a scene in there that I guess is linked to St. Patrick's Day, so that's why it's probably. But it wouldn't be like your go-to thought for like a movie to watch on St. Patrick's Day or even that theme. So some people thinking outside the box. So I like that. But yeah. Um, but yeah, I gotta send out a few reminders because it's still a pretty um, low participation rate at this point for what I'm looking for.
I think people should just binge Dairy Girls.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
probably should have put. Yeah, well, yeah, TV shows would have been tougher because you have to probably allocate more time to binge watch. But yeah, I could have done that too. Um, it is interesting though to watch because I kind of like for me, I don't really go out for the day, just because at some point I kind of felt like it had turned into very much an amateur hour. Just people going out to,
Was that when you started dyeing Rivers green?
we don't do that in Boston.
Are you sure?
Although some people might argue that, we have, our rivers are green all the time. But,
You got to watch the Banshees of Inisherin too.
Oh,
Yep,
that's great.
that's that's a disturbing film.
yeah, I was going to say, no one likes anything lighthearted for,
No.
I mean, that is lighthearted. Of all of that similar ilk of movies, most of them are lighthearted slash comedies. There's one that is very depressing, but I won't name it. But otherwise, those ones are all great to watch.
yeah, I'm a big fan of, The Guard.
Yeah, also lighthearted.
Um, but that's got some pretty good humor in it. Anyone seen I'm curious what the Ondine that
Heard of it, haven't watched it yet.
ties a little bit into the Silkie
Hmm.
whiskey we were drinking. So that one's not bad. It's kind of a almost a crime thriller. Um so that one's one that you don't necessarily know what you're getting into. It's kind of surprising, I guess is how I'd put it. But plays into Irish folklore a lot. But um anyone got any trips to Ireland coming up?
I mean, I'd say yes, but I'm here at the moment.
Yeah.
Coming back later in the year, I'll be back in end of July, start of August.
So we're not going to see it Whiskey Live this year, huh?
No, this time around, my parents both turn 80 this year, so my trips are planned around their birthdays.
Oh, very nice.
Next year, I'll get to Whiskey Live, I think.
When aren't you going on the boat later or ship?
Yep, I'm doing that. That's November.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
late.
yeah. D's on the boat.
I'm on the boat.
D's
I
on the
know.
boat.
I'll see you again.
I don't do boats. Boats suck.
Boats full of whiskey are better than boats without whiskey.
Well, the only benefit of that boat would be I'd be drinking a lot of whiskey, but I'm afraid I'd be like puking most of it up. So I'm not doing boats.
I'm going.
We
Boats.
we we accept your grateful sacrifice for the rest of us, Jeff.
Yeah. I would say the
Bye-bye.
river there might be green too.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that should be
Nope.
fun.
Yeah. The whiskey boat, not whiskey bus, whiskey.
Yeah. Well, some of us will be in, we're going to be over there not too long in May for the group trip to Belfast. So looking forward to that. And Whiskey Live at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And Friends at Hand have released a new series of cast strength bottles, so that could be a good thing for people to pick up in your
Yeah, when
sink.
I was there in December, they said they were coming. So I figured they'd be available by the time we got there. So that's
Yeah,
good that they're there already.
I think it's just cast strength Bushmills.
Oh,
Do you have your 40-year-old Bushmills case coming yet?
Yeah.
Sorry, let me rephrase. Cast strength low teens Bushmills, not those ones.
Did they do the entire range all at once, or they gotta do them as like
I
one-offs?
don't know. I got the impression there were a couple, but I didn't think it was a full, complete set. It might have been just replacing the ones that sold out.
Okay.
Although the cast strength one that's empty with the feather in it would be an interesting sell.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to. I haven't set the lineup. We're gonna be doing a tasting there during our week. Um, on the Wednesday, we're gonna do an in-store tasting. I just haven't set the lineup yet, but I kind of wanted it to be Northern Ireland centric, with the idea that maybe we do one of their store bottling. So maybe I'll have to see what they actually have out. But we don't have to set the lineup till like literally the day before, so it gives me time to wait to see what comes out.
You're going to get to visit Friend at Hand?
Yeah, we're gonna do a tasting there.
that was amazing. That
Yeah.
was one of the best I'd ever done.
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
great place. So that's kind of from I don't know, I kind of call it, to me it'll be might be the highlight of the trip because we're gonna be traveling, visiting a lot of places, but I might be looking forward to that the most. Um, but we'll see. You never know. Sometimes you get surprised by things.
Are you going to get to Hearth Bar when you're up in Belfast?
Um,
there,
Possibly. I Let's put it this way.
across the
I
street.
might do it unofficially. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's not a formal part of the thing. I mean, people for the most part have their nights free. So it'd just be a case of, do we try to get over there one night, or do we do it like the Sunday before
I,
things
I
would?
would recommend. I had a great time when I was there. So
Yeah. A lot
Is
of
it near
it's
the hotel, Alan?
no,
No?
no, that one's that's the main issue. It's not, you have to kind of get, you have to get a, cab ride there. Might be more hard to get a cab ride back.
so just for reference, before midnight, you have to order cabs in Belfast. After midnight, you can hail them on the street. But before midnight, if you try to hail a cab, it will not stop for you.
Yeah. So that one's about, I don't know, what do you say, 15, 20 minutes kind of
Something
outside
like
of
that. There's
downtown?
buses that run out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not downtown. It's doable. It's just not
You could walk it.
easy. It's not like walkable from the hotel.
Mhm.
So we'll see. Um, Leaving some things unscripted, as they might say, but there's certainly there's a lot to do. So we'll see what we can pack in or not. But I definitely kind of want to get over there. Just a question of when.
So as someone mentioned Dairy Girls before, as I have people here watched Give My Headpiece.
Watch what?
Give My Headpiece.
Give my head peace.
It's a Belfast comedy. It's probably 20, 25 years old at the moment, but it was a split between you had a Catholic family with Da, Ma, and Cal, and
Mhm.
then their daughter was married to Billy, who was an RUC officer who lived with his uncle Andy. It's all, most of it is available on YouTube. It's well worth watching. It just leans heavily. They take the piss out of both sides of it. So it's heavily sectarian, but very, very funny.
We'll put that on our list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great episode where Da and Cal are watching the 12th of July marches and they're getting really aggravated. And the daughter's like, "What are they doing?" And the mother's like, "Oh, they're watching the video from last year." So it's that sort of, it's every stereotype you can imagine, but it's on both sides. So it balances out.
Sort of.
Huh, okay,
Okay.
cool.
Cool. Thank you, Kian.
No worries.
Uh, Before I forget, what were your impressions of the changing time stout, Kian?
It was nice. It was very rich. So the logic they gave me in the Palace Bar was a number of publicans came together to brew this because they had a stout, I want to say an IPA and a
They have a
pale ale.
lager and an ale.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And it was
lager and ale were available in December. I liked both. I think I
yeah.
liked the lager better at the
The
time.
downside was the stout seemed to be more expensive than Guinness, which defeats the purpose of having something you can control the cost of. It was nice. It was rich. It's not something I would necessarily drink a second one of straight away. I would have just gone straight back to Guinness. But it was still very pleasant to drink.
I think part of my guess is the theme is to have a little bit more control.
True, but if you charge more than a pint of Guinness is, why would you convince the average person to go
Oh no,
buy
I
it?
agree. I think we'll see what happens over time, but
Yeah.
or maybe maybe that's the cost and it'll remain the cost, and because it seems like every 6 months they keep raising the price of Guinness.
That is true.
So they'll figure in another year or two they'll be below it. Who knows? But um, yeah, it's just an interesting thing because if you go to like Long Haul or there's at least a dozen pubs involved in it, so they're
Yeah,
all
I think we
pouring.
said about that. I haven't, yeah, so far Palace and Bar 1661 are the only two places I've been in town.
Okay,
To Grogan, Stag's Head, and Long Haul over the next few days.
okay, yeah. Do they serve it in that special mug?
In the tankard with a handle, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what you're paying extra for.
But it's like down in Waterford, there's J&K Spirit Grocers, and they serve their Guinness in a tankard.
Okay. I haven't had that before. How's that?
It's nice. It was good Guinness. I liked
Oh, it's
J&K.
just it's Guinness.
It's
It's
Guinness, but it's in a tankard. So it's just
okay.
rather than the proper Guinness pint glass or the Vortex one,
Okay.
it's a Guinness
I thought it
tankard.
was
No.
a local craft brewer. Okay. Um, yeah. Are you picking up bottles along the way as you've been traveling over there?
I have, but I'm mainly bringing back beer this time because I
Oh,
want to
okay.
do, I said the Lochgill and Boan tasting, and I can bring back a number of Lochgill beers. So I'll see what room I have for whiskey when I come back.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'll be back again in July, so I can bring them back then.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's do a time check. It's a quarter of. Probably should call it a day slash night depending on where you are. I guess Key you're up. It's not too late where you are.
No, it's not even 10 p.m. It's a
I was
reasonable
gonna say
time.
if you were downtown, you'd still be in plenty of time for last call. Something tells me you've got reserves. Maybe not your apocalypse reserve at home, but
I have enough while I'm here.
get
Fear
an
not.
emergency stash. But any while we're together, any questions from me on upcoming stuff or turf or anything else for that matter?
Thank you for putting this together, Alan. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Anyone has ideas on things they'd like to see, virtual events, things like that upcoming, just let me know. I don't at this last year, I think at this time I had already had a kind of a schedule of things to do for virtual events planned out for the year, and this year I it's pretty open. Um, I'll probably try to line some stuff up when I visit in May, but at this point it's pretty open. So if anybody's um, kind of hankering for a particular theme or something to do, let me know. we'll try to see if we can put something together. But I'm hoping we'll see. I guess I'm fingers crossed. I mean, some of the news that's coming out, if anyone's paying attention, is not all super promising. I wouldn't necessarily call it depressing, but there's
You mean the
definitely
Diageo, the pause in production?
there's just a pause, and yeah, I mean, Middleton's Great Northern's even pulling back. There's just a glut, um, which so it doesn't necessarily mm, portend bad things, but there's some of the smaller distillers that um, may find it tougher to
Yeah.
sell their product. So I think for April, I might try to do something. I'm going to probably try to push the idea of just buying from some of our partners online just to help. Every little bit helps, but
Yep.
just because I think, it's just tough to get your stuff on the shelf here with there's such an oversupply of bourbon. So helping out some of these smaller distillers in Ireland. I know a lot of you guys do your part based on the pictures I see of deliveries. I'm looking at you, Richard. But and I know a lot of you are more active on the auctions than I am, so and tend to or more successful on the auctions. Maybe I should put it that way. You're outbidding me. But um no, so thanks for joining in today. Appreciate it. Hopefully got to try some stuff maybe you haven't had before. And any questions, follow-up questions after the fact, you know where to find me. But we'll be in touch. I'll have probably the newsletter out this week ahead of St. Patrick's Day. So if I don't talk to you guys, enjoy St. Patrick's Day, however you do. I'll
Thank you, Alan.
I won't know what movie you're watching because I didn't assign emails to the answers, so it's all anonymous. But I'm gonna try to find out who responded with a couple of those things, maybe, because some of those answers were interesting. Let me just leave it at that. But
I will say that the yes and no ones were difficult because, like, do you wear green? I didn't until a year ago when I bought the most gaudy green Irish shirts to embrace it that I could. But previously, I'm like, I'm not wearing green. Why would I do that? The
yeah,
color is blue.
nah, I know. Well, I tried to keep it simple, and then I left that last question available if anybody wanted to express their detailed thoughts on things. But so I didn't want it to become an ordeal. I wanted people to respond. So, but I did get some interesting answers on some of them, so I appreciate that. But so everybody enjoy the weekend because I have a feeling it's going to turn into a 3-day event this year, or a 4-day event maybe. Just people want to start on Friday, just kind of make it a long weekend, but we'll see. But it's a good seeing you all, and we'll see you
Take
again
care.
soon.
Thank you all.
All right,
Bye.
thank you.
Alan.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one.
Gotcha.